Hello, my name is Richard Fisher, and I'm here to help you navigate through the book of Isaiah so that you can understand it and then apply and teach it. Today we're going to be going through Isaiah 28 through 35. In the first section, we find God calling Israel to meet him and discuss their life and their future. They're to meet and talk about it. He says, "Come now, let us reason together." And as God begins to talk, he calls Israel to see the salvation that he's provided. Then we go to the nations, and he looks at the nations because the nations have been all around Israel, and they have been engaging Israel, and Israel actually has turned away from God, and they began to follow the nations around them. And so what this passage is doing, as we come to the third part of Isaiah, what God is doing, he's focusing on Israel, and he wants them to understand the outcome of their choices. He wants them to understand the outcome of their choice to follow the nations. It could have dire effects. Matter of fact, as you begin to read, you see that it does. What God says is this. It doesn't sound good. He says, "Whoa." And in chapters 28 through 32, we find that there are actually 4 woes. There are 4 woes that take place. And wow, you get the, wait a minute, you say, is God against Israel? Is he trying to destroy Israel? Which, as you read the passage, you begin to understand that God is not trying to destroy them. God is actually trying to warn them, because with the woes, they're mixed in are the words of hope. So we have 4 woes mixed in with the words of hope. So you get the idea that God is giving them a choice. And he says, you have chosen to follow the ways of the nations. And in doing that, you have failed to realize that their way leads to death, and if you follow them, you will die. I've asked you to trust me, to embrace me, so that I can save you, so that I can cleanse you, so that I can work in your life. And then you begin to see, as I see, you look at the nations, you see their plight, you embrace what I do, and then you take that light to the nations. But instead of doing that, they're wrestling with this. And as they wrestle with this, what is taking place is this. They are missing out on what God has called them to do. They are to take God and the Word of God. They're to become the voice of God to these nations. But they are not doing that. They do not speak for God. God has also called them to go, and they are to represent God before the nations. But they are not doing that. They do not represent God to the nations. And because of this, the nations are left in darkness. And what they fear probably most of all is what takes place when the nations are left to themselves. They're not interested in bringing salvation or joy. They're interested in that which is selfish, and they conquer. And we find that that's what's taking place in Israel now. They find themselves fearing the Assyrians. And so what God does is he addresses the Assyrians, and we find that there's one more woe. One more woe. And that woe is addressed to the nations, but especially the Assyrians. And he's going to explain to them that if they actually do their evil to Israel, that they themselves will find themselves under the judgment of God. What happens here is that now the world, everything is playing out. If you continue to walk in the ways of death, if you continue to walk in the ways of the world, it just brings this ever-spiraling cycle that goes downward to destruction. And God is giving them a warning, and in the warning he hopes to open their eyes so that they will begin to reason that it's best to follow God and to embrace him and his hope. Well, what the book ends with in chapter 35, once again, is the call to salvation. Is the call to salvation. And God is actually saying to them, now that you've seen the cycle, you understand how the nations are living, now that you see what you're supposed to do, or how you can embrace life and then offer that to the nations, I would have you make the choice to reason together, to choose to follow God, and to see and enter into the salvation which he brings.